I now look to Bayefsky to close the case for the proposition.
I want you to vote in the affirmative for the right reasons, so I'm going to be direct with you. Tonight, Palestinian UN Representative Mansour played the role of victim of the United Nations. Last Friday, he did exactly the opposite. Threatening the United States, he boasted, and I quote, "We have a lot of weapons in the UN." Friday's posture rings truer, for indeed, Palestinians and their co-conspirators in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation have weaponized the UN. They've spent 7 decades hijacking and corrupting UN institutions in support of their violent, xenophobic rejection of a Jewish state. The UN's failure to fulfill the promise of promoting peace and security and protecting human rights was the predictable casualty. Understanding what ails the UN isn't rocket science. There are 193 member states. 119 of them belong to the organization, the non-aligned movement so-called, and the largest single voting bloc in the non-aligned movement is are the 56 Islamic states.
57.
At Freedom's states, I said.
57
As
states.
Freedom House attests, a small fraction of the members of the OIC and the non-aligned movement are democratic. Less than half the members of the entire UN are fully free democracies. Why is the UN failing? Do the math. With those numbers in mind, I'm going to address 5 major arguments on the opposition side of this debate. Argument 1, the UN is international democracy at work. 1 state, 1 vote. The trouble is, international democracy is not actual democracy, offering full democratic rights to the folks back home. Take the Palestinian Authority, whose leader is entering the 12th year of his 4-year term, and whose stated goal is a country without minority rights, or more precisely, ethnically cleansed of Jews. In practice, the UN's international democracy formula allowed Saudi Arabia to be elected to the Human Rights Council in October, for a 4th term. Iran was elected to the UN Commission on the Status of Women, even though President Rouhani himself was elected only after 99% of candidates were summarily disqualified, including every woman. One might describe UN democracy as 1 despot, 1 vote. Number 2, it's all about inclusivity. We need a UN that welcomes all, no judgment, no Western hegemony. But if the rationale for the UN was really about inclusivity, why does the UN's top women's rights body annually adopt only 1 resolution critical of only 1 state for violating the rights of women anywhere in the world? Israel, for violating the rights of Palestinian women.
Because there is
that
one
would be
occupation.
Israel,
One
Saudi
occupation.
enslavement, Iranian stoning, Sudanese spousal rape, and oh yes, Palestinian men, they all get a free pass. At the UN, inclusivity means avoiding women's equality and LGBT rights in the name of cultural particularities. It means tolerating intolerance. Argument number 3 lionizes the General Assembly in comparison to the Security Council. The veto power is the problem. Except consider the General Assembly's record. The General Assembly hasn't held an emergency special session in 20 years on any subject but Israel. 400,000 dead in Syria, and a few weeks ago, all the General Assembly could muster was a 3-hour informal session to discuss the possibility of eventually having a special session on Syria. No emergency special sessions were ever held on genocide in Rwanda or Sudan. But the Assembly did manage to adopt, during President Likatov's term, 19 resolutions condemning Israel and only 7 critical of human rights conditions in any of the other 192 states. Full disclosure, President Likatov was asked at the UN this past September to respond specifically to the General Assembly's record of bias and double standards applied to the Jewish state. And this is his response, and I quote, "Some of my closest lifelong friends are Jewish." In short, the Palestinians' gain has been the loss for victims of human rights abuse worldwide, and UN credibility system-wide. Take UNESCO. Last month, at Palestinian behest, UNESCO scrubbed the Jewish identity from Judaism's holiest site, the Jerusalem's 3,000-year-old Temple Mount and the Western Wall. The Palestinian Authority is now laying claim to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Speculation is growing that Buckingham Palace is next. ISIS flattens churches with bulldozers, and the Palestinians erase Jewish history with the United Nations. Or take the General Assembly on terrorism. There is no UN definition of terrorism, because at the UN, one man's killer of women and children is another man's natural outlet for frustration and territorial disappointments. So the Security Council has never condemned the terrorist organization Hamas. The 13-year-old Israeli girl who was stabbed in the back while sleeping in her bed by a Palestinian teenager this past June doesn't count. Or, as Palestinian Ambassador Mansour said as he opened a UN exhibit last year, in November, I'm going to quote him, "We are so proud that the backbone of this popular uprising are the youth of Palestine." Since he spoke, 30 Palestinian minors have killed and attempted to kill Israelis. Incitement to terrorism is a criminal act and a violation of the rights of the Palestinian children who are indoctrinated and recruited, and yet it's facilitated through the UN. Argument number 4. The UN Secretariat is fond of blaming the states for the UN's ills. By contrast, the UN Civil Service is doing good works. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The answer here is that if you had 50 billion annual revenue, you do something good too. But you'd do it if the institution were accountable much better. You wouldn't prop up tyrants like Saddam Hussein, as did Secretary General Kofi Annan's bureaucracy. You wouldn't spread cholera in Haiti, but deny culpability and reparations, as has Ban Ki-moon. And you wouldn't still be watching UN peacekeepers rape the world's most vulnerable women. So last but not least comes the cheery refrain, the glass is half full, send more money, and do UN reform. But the majority isn't going to impose membership conditions that they themselves can't satisfy, or fret about spending and accounting for other people's money, or prevent the Jewish state from being the perennial whipping boy and expedient diversionary tactic. Today's UN is dominated by non-democracies for non-democracies. Of course it's failing. Your challenge: design the right multilateral institution for the 21st century. Thank you.